Mel Brooks invested roughly $2.8 million to bring Young Frankenstein to life in 1974, but during production, one moment nearly unraveled the entire film. While shooting a scene with Madeline Kahn, Marty Feldman impulsively bit into her mink stole. What followed was pure chaos. The fur tore loose, floated through the set, and sent the cast into uncontrollable laughter. They attempted the scene again and again, 15 takes in total, but no one could regain composure. The damage to the costume was costly, and Brooks made a decision that stunned everyone. He removed the scene entirely. For 4 decades, the footage remained hidden. When it finally emerged in 2014, audiences understood this wasn't just an outtake. It was the moment a carefully balanced production came closest to spinning out of control. The film itself did not begin as a parody dreamt up overnight. Gene Wilder's idea took shape in the winter of 1973, while he was staying in West Hampton, New York. Each afternoon, he found himself watching the old Frankenstein films, letting them play at the same hour every day. Long after the credits rolled, the mood lingered. Wilder picked up a yellow legal pad and began writing, slowly forming the story of Victor Frankenstein's anxious great-grandson returning to Transylvania. His goal was never to mock the classics. He wanted to honor them. That decision defined the entire project. Wilder envisioned a film that looked and felt like the early Universal horror pictures, where the humor emerged from within the world, not from standing outside it and pointing. Later, Wilder said many of those early pages survived almost untouched, including the first meeting between Dr. Frankenstein and Igor at the train station. It felt, to him, as if the story had arrived fully formed, and his only task was to hold on to it. But inspiration alone does not make a movie. Reality arrived while Wilder was working on Blazing Saddles. He approached Mel Brooks with the idea in a way that only Wilder could. To make it official, he handed Brooks a symbolic down payment, $50 in cash. When Brooks asked if that was all the money Wilder had, Wilder simply opened his wallet and gave it to him on the spot. Brooks later described that moment as the true beginning of their partnership. From there, the work became ritual. Nights were spent in Wilder's hotel bungalow, seated over Earl Grey tea and digestive biscuits, shaping scenes line by line. They refined the jokes carefully, making sure the humor landed cleanly without breaking the illusion of the world. It wasn't about speed. It was about tone. Around the same time, a series of small coincidences began assembling the cast. Wilder's agent, Mike Medavoy, represented both Marty Feldman and Peter Boyle. When Wilder started developing the script, Medavoy asked Brooks whether he had a project that could bring all three together. Wilder immediately knew who belonged where. Feldman was Igor. Boyle, with his ability to project menace and vulnerability at once, was the monster. Even the physical details felt oddly destined. Boyle's makeup required 5 hours every day. Feldman's hump was nothing more than a maternity cushion stuffed into his costume. The imperfections became assets. The film began to feel as though it was selecting its cast rather than the other way around. Still, the biggest struggle had nothing to do with comedy. It was about reverence. Brooks and Wilder were determined to shoot in black and white, echoing the 1930s horror films, especially James Whale's 1931 Frankenstein. Studios resisted. Columbia Pictures worried about the cost and pushed for color. Brooks refused. When Columbia stepped away, Alan Ladd Jr. at 20th Century Fox stepped in, approving both the black and white format and a budget of $2.4 million. With that decision locked, the tribute deepened. Production designer Dale Hennessy worked meticulously to recreate the visual language of the original films. He even helped locate authentic laboratory equipment with ties to the 1931 production through effects designer Kenneth Strickfaden. The intention was clear: immerse the audience fully in that gothic world first, then let the comedy strike once they were already standing in the shadows. As the elements aligned, the people behind them began to define cinema history. Marty Feldman arrived in Hollywood for the first time visibly nervous during auditions, but Wilder never doubted him. He later called Feldman the heart and soul of the production. His unpredictable energy gave Igor a pulse. The now iconic limp and cane in the Walk This Way scene were improvised on the spot and became inseparable from the character. To exaggerate the physicality, tissues were stuffed into Feldman's knees to make them knobby, and his naturally bulging eyes, caused by a thyroid condition, were emphasized rather than concealed. Wilder compared their dynamic to classic comedy duos, with Feldman channeling Stan Laurel and himself playing Oliver Hardy. As Feldman settled into that rhythm, his initial anxiety disappeared. The role would come to define his career, earning him a Saturn Award. Terry Garr's path was just as determined, though it took a different turn. She initially auditioned for Elizabeth, the fiancée, only to be told by Brooks that Madeline Kahn was his first choice. Garr could have left then. Instead, Wilder encouraged her to return the next day and read for Inga. At the time, she was working on the Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour, and she approached the second audition with precision. She collaborated with a German wig stylist, refined the accent, and even exaggerated her figure by padding her bra with socks. The performance landed immediately. Brooks cast her on the spot. Lines delivered with absolute confidence, spoken in that unmistakable accent, became endlessly quoted, blurring the line between character and pop culture. Even the surprises had logic behind them. Gene Hackman, known almost exclusively for dramatic roles, was a friend of Wilder's, and the two played tennis together. Hackman asked for a small part. The blind hermit remained uncast, and the role went to him. What sounded risky became legendary. Hackman played the character with complete seriousness, allowing the absurdity around him to unfold naturally. Buried beneath a heavy beard and left uncredited, his performance became one of the film's most memorable sequences. Peter Boyle endured the most physically demanding role of all. William Tuttle's makeup kept in a chair for hours each day, trapping heat under the studio lights. Platform boots added 6 inches to his height. The strain was real, sometimes severe enough to blister his skin. But Boyle committed fully. Beneath the monster's size and power, he brought a childlike fragility that made the creature both terrifying and deeply lonely. Comfort was never the priority. Emotional truth was. Cloris Leachman approached her role from the opposite end of the emotional spectrum, shaping Frau Blucher as a force of nature contained within a human body. She played the character with absolute seriousness, never softening a moment for the sake of a laugh. That commitment sharpened the comedy instead of dulling it. Her accent was fixed from the very beginning, modeled after Mel Brooks' own mother, who was German and frequently present on set. Makeup artist William Tuttle amplified her presence by adding an oversized mole, aging her appearance and giving her an intimidating edge. Even her name became a running gag, punctuated by horses whinnying off-screen, and Leachman's iron control made that simple joke feel ominous, almost supernatural. The performance earned her a Golden Globe nomination and proved she could be terrifying, hilarious, and strange without ever acknowledging the joke or breaking character. That discipline mattered because protecting the film's tone was a constant battle. Wilder and Brooks were relentless in their writing sessions. They argued for hours, sometimes pacing the room, sometimes shouting over minor changes. Brooks later admitted they came close to a physical fight more than once. Wilder remembered one explosion that ended with Brooks storming out, only to call back 10 minutes later, yelling, "Who was that madman in your house? You should never let crazy people into your house." The chaos had a purpose. Every scene was squeezed until it worked exactly as intended. That intensity nearly erased what would become one of the film's most famous moments. The Puttin' on the Ritz number was almost cut before it ever existed. Wilder envisioned Dr. Frankenstein presenting the monster to high society, dressed in a top hat and tails, performing a polished song and dance routine. Brooks read the idea and immediately rejected it. He exploded, reminding Wilder that he had tap danced to Irving Berlin in Top Hat years earlier and accusing him of repeating himself in the most absurd way possible. Wilder refused to let it go. Red-faced, he argued for nearly 20 minutes. Finally, Brooks agreed to shoot it as a test, setting one condition: if even a single person said it was silly or stupid, the scene would be removed. The test screening erased all doubt. The sequence landed perfectly and stayed in the film. Years later, Brooks admitted he had never been more wrong about anything in his life. That instinct for balance also led Wilder to draw a surprising boundary. He did not want Brooks to appear on screen. Wilder feared that Brooks's natural tendency to break the fourth wall would fracture the carefully built illusion. Brooks pushed back, asking if he was truly that disruptive. Wilder reassured him it was not about talent, but tone. He imagined Brooks in medieval armor, lifting his visor and greeting the audience directly. To preserve the world they had built, Brooks stayed off camera, though he still slipped in through voice work, providing the sounds of Victor Frankenstein and the werewolf. None of it would have mattered if the film did not look right. Brooks insisted on shooting in black and white in 1974, At a time when color dominated the industry and studios feared audiences would reject anything else. Even cinematographer Gerald Hirschfeld resisted at first. Brooks held firm, chasing the precise mood of the old Universal horror films. The details followed. They used 1930s-style opening credits, iris outs, wipes, and classic fades to black, turning the edit itself into a time machine. Composer John Morris crafted a score that felt authentic to the era, moving seamlessly between eerie horror motifs and gentle, romantic melodies that sounded as though they belonged to another decade entirely. For the laboratory, authenticity went even deeper. Kenneth Strickfaden, the effects designer from the 1931 Frankenstein, had stored the original electrical props in his Santa Monica garage for more than 40 years. When the production teams saw them, they were stunned to discover the equipment still worked. Strickfaden offered to rent it for $1,000. Brooks refused and insisted on paying $12,500 out of respect. At the center stood Strickfaden's variable traveling arc, throwing real sparks across the set, making it feel as if the past itself had come alive. By late 1973, the atmosphere on set was loose and playful, but one moment pushed everyone beyond control. During Elizabeth's dramatic entrance into the castle, Marty Feldman made an impulsive decision no one anticipated. In character as Igor, he suddenly leaned forward and bit the tail of Madeline Kahn's mink wrap. It was unplanned and unrehearsed. White mink hairs burst into the air, some lodging directly in Feldman's mouth. He tried to continue, but kept stopping, spitting fur out like chewing gum. Each bite sent Kahn screaming. Wilder froze in panic. The cast collapsed. No one could breathe, let alone perform. What should have taken minutes spiraled into chaos. The crew shot the scene nearly 15 times, more than any other moment in the film. Eventually, Brooks had to shut everything down just to let the laughter fade. Despite the joy it created, the scene never survived the final cut. Test audiences laughed too early and too loudly, breaking the rhythm of the parody and stealing momentum from what was meant to follow, especially the Puttin' on the Ritz sequence. Brooks realized that one uncontrolled gag could flatten the careful buildup of the entire film. He cut the full mink bite moment, leaving only a brief shot of Feldman's warped grin. The madness remained, but it whispered instead of shouting. For decades, the footage stayed hidden, surfacing only in rare behind-the-scenes reels and deleted scene collections. Wilder later admitted that this single improvisation caused more delays than any other part of the shoot, revealing how fragile even the most joyful comedy can be. The shock was not just emotional. Madeline Kahn's mink wrap cost $50 in 1973, roughly $325 today. Feldman genuinely damaged it, sending expensive fur across the set. Kahn later joked about it, reminding him those were real minks, but the repairs still had to be made and tempers still had to cool. One impulsive choice rippled outward, forcing retakes, costume fixes, and a director's hard decision to protect the film's flow. That same tension between instinct and control surfaced again with Gene Wilder himself. When he arrived on set as Dr. Frankenstein, he wore a thin, old-fashioned mustache that was never written into the script. Brooks disliked it immediately. It clashed with the image he had imagined. Wilder believed in it so strongly that he filmed key scenes twice, once with a mustache and once without. When Brooks reviewed the footage, his opinion shifted. He later wrote that Wilder had never looked more handsome in a role. What began as a quiet disagreement became one of the character's defining features, another example of how Young Frankenstein found its balance by walking the line between precision and impulse. A small choice, almost invisible, yet it added warmth and a trace of old-world elegance to the performance. And that same quiet attention to detail kept allowing improvisation to shape the film in ways no one fully planned. When Gene Hackman joined the cast as the Blind Hermit, the role was designed to be modest and contained. Still, Hackman asked if he could explore the scene a little. In the middle of the take, he casually delivered a line about making espresso, an unmistakably modern reference that made no historical sense at all. The set erupted. Brooks recognized it instantly for what it was and kept it in. The scene cuts to black almost immediately afterward, as if the film itself knows it has gone too far and needs to recover. That single line became one of the most quoted moments in the movie, a reminder that sometimes the boldest laugh comes from the one detail that absolutely does not belong. While some actors played with freedom, others endured the work in silence. Peter Boyle spent hours every day sealed beneath layers of prosthetics to become the monster. The makeup process often took 4 hours, trapping heat, glue, and sweat against his skin beneath unforgiving studio lights. By the end of a shooting day, his face could feel as if it were overheating, the makeup threatening to soften or slip. For certain scenes, fiberglass molds were created to protect him from injury. The process was exhausting and uncomfortable, but Boyle never pulled back. What emerged was a creature that felt dangerous and powerful, yet unmistakably human beneath the surface. And then there was Marty Feldman, continuing to inject chaos in quieter ways. Igor's wandering hump was never scripted. Feldman simply began shifting it from side to side between scenes. One moment it rested on the left, the next it appeared on the right. The crew noticed. Laughter followed. Brooks and Wilder embraced it fully. The moving hump became a subtle visual joke, rewarding viewers who paid attention and perfectly capturing the spirit of a production that thrived on controlled unpredictability. Mel Brooks's imagination constantly tested that balance. Some ideas were so extreme, they threatened to change the entire film in a single beat. At one point, Brooks suggested that the monster should speak his first words as a Cary Grant impression. On paper, it was bold and undeniably funny, but also dangerous. The joke would have landed hard and instantly shattered the atmosphere they had worked so carefully to preserve. Gene Wilder understood the risk immediately. As co-writer and lead actor, he chose a quiet strategy. He nodded, pretended to write the idea down, and hoped Brooks would forget it. Somehow he did. That moment revealed the difference between them. Brooks loved comedy that charged forward and dared the audience to keep up. Wilder wanted the humor to live inside the story without breaking its spell. He believed the monster needed to feel human before becoming funny. That restraint made room for lines that were humorous and oddly tender at the same time, including the famously simple declaration, "A monster." Seen through that lens, the entire set becomes a place where balance was constantly under pressure. Young Frankenstein was a comedy, but it was also a precise homage to classic horror. Even a slight shift could tip it into pure silliness. Brooks would push the joke forward. Wilder would pull it back. Somewhere between those forces, the film found its footing again and again. Still, no amount of control could tame everything. One of the most infamous moments unfolded during the mink-biting scene with Marty Feldman and Madeline Kahn. On screen, the idea was already risky. Off camera, it became pure disorder. Feldman kept biting the mink wrap, and each time, loose fur filled his mouth. Then the laughter began, not polite laughter, but the kind that destroys a take and leaves everyone gasping for air. They reportedly shot the scene as many as 15 times because no one could regain control. Each take came with consequences. The costumes were expensive, and the mink wrap was not a prop designed for repeated abuse. Priced at around $50 at the time, it deteriorated quickly under the strain. With every bite, the wardrobe suffered more damage. Time slipped away. Energy faded. Laughter spilled into moments that were never meant to be funny. The crew reset the scene again and again, cleaning fur from the set and trying to restore focus. In the end, the moment became legendary, but it was also too powerful to include. It was the kind of chaos that could pull an audience out of the film entirely. To protect the rhythm and the illusion, it had to be left behind, another reminder that even in comedy, restraint can be the difference between madness and magic. Then came a disruption from an entirely different direction, casting. Madeline Kahn had originally been chosen to play Inga, the warm and devoted laboratory assistant. Late in the process, that plan shifted. Kahn was reassigned to the role of Elizabeth, and the production had to pivot quickly. Inga needed to be recast, and the part ultimately went to Terry Garr. The change rippled outward. Dialogue adjustments had to be made. Costumes were redesigned. Performances had to be recalibrated. And all of it happened dangerously close to the start of filming, when time was already tight and pressure was high. But once Kahn stepped into Elizabeth, the uncertainty disappeared. Her presence carried a refined, almost classical dramatic quality, and she could flip that seriousness into comedy in a heartbeat. That ability reshaped several key moments in the film, including the now legendary "Oh Sweet Mystery of Life" sequence. What began as a logistical gamble turned into one of the movie's greatest strengths. Kahn's Elizabeth became unforgettable, a character audiences would still be quoting decades later. At the center of everything was Gene Wilder, quietly reshaping his own screen persona. Audiences already associated him with Willy Wonka, dreamy, playful, and untethered from reality. Dr. Frankenstein required something else entirely. He had to feel credible inside a gothic horror film, yet fragile enough to carry the comedy. Brooks initially leaned toward a broader, more exaggerated scientist. Wilder resisted. He argued for restraint. Not muted, not dull, just grounded. He built the character through subtle choices, precise gestures, controlled movement, and a voice that could slide from confidence to panic in an instant. Brooks later admitted that Wilder's approach became the emotional anchor of the film, giving it weight even as the humor veered into absurdity. That strength came with a risk. The cast chemistry was explosive, and if it tipped too far, the film could dissolve into chaos. That danger was real. Entire scenes collapsed into laughter. Some moments were so uncontrolled they threatened to shatter the illusion completely. At one point, Cloris Leachman reportedly called out from backstage, "I'm going to pee," overwhelmed by the situation. It was funny, but it was also a warning. Without discipline, the film could easily become a behind-the-scenes circus instead of a polished tribute. Brooks and Wilder made the hard decisions. They trimmed the wildest improvisations. They tightened the pacing. They allowed just enough madness to leak through to give the film its energy, but never enough to break its spell. What audiences saw was not restraint by accident, but by design. Then came the greatest gamble of all. Young Frankenstein premiered on December 15, 1974. By that point, Brooks had convinced 20th Century Fox to back the film with a budget of roughly $2.8 million, a large sum for a comedy, and an even bigger risk given that it was shot entirely in black and white. In the mid-1970s, color dominated theaters, and many in the industry doubted audiences would show up for a monochrome parody. Columbia Pictures had hesitated over both the budget and the aesthetic, ultimately stepping away. At Fox, Alan Ladd Jr. took the risk and signed off. The doubts didn't last. Against its modest budget, the film exploded at the box office. It earned over $86 million in the United States and more than $86 million worldwide. Some estimates placed its return at nearly 30 times its cost. What had once looked like a stylistic gamble became a textbook success story. And the impact went beyond revenue. The film became a cultural fixture, quoted endlessly, rewatched obsessively, and passed from one generation to the next. Critical recognition followed. Young Frankenstein holds a 95% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, with an average score of 8.6 out of 10. It earned 2 Academy Award nominations, including Best Adapted Screenplay for Brooks and Wilder and Best Sound. Instead of fading with time, its reputation only deepened. In 2003, the Library of Congress selected Young Frankenstein for preservation in the National Film Registry, recognizing its cultural, historical, and aesthetic significance. Only 25 films are added each year. Its inclusion sealed its place not just as entertainment, but as part of America's recorded memory. Around the same time, the American Film Institute added its own stamp of approval. In 2000, AFI ranked the film number 13 on its 100 Years, 100 Laughs list. In 2004, it appeared again on AFI's 100 Years, 100 Songs list, thanks to Puttin' on the Ritz. The film wasn't just funny. It was iconic. Even the chaos that never made it on screen gained a second life. The infamous mink-biting blooper remained hidden for years, whispered about, occasionally screened at special events, but largely unseen. It wasn't until the 40th anniversary Blu-ray release in 2014 that the footage became widely available. By then, it was more than a blooper. It was evidence of the chemistry, the excess energy, and the discipline required to shape that energy into something lasting. And once a film reaches that level of love, its story never truly ends. It keeps echoing, finding new forms, new audiences, and new attempts to capture lightning again. Proof that Young Frankenstein was never just a parody, but a carefully controlled miracle that almost flew apart at every step. In 2007, Young Frankenstein made the leap from screen to stage, reimagined as a Broadway musical written by Mel Brooks and co-directed with Susan Stroman. The production was mounted with genuine care and ambition, but it faced an obstacle that could not be engineered away. The shadow of the original cast loomed over everything. Gene Wilder's Dr. Frankenstein, Marty Feldman's Igor, and Cloris Leachman's Frau Blücher had become so deeply imprinted on the material that replacing them was never going to be simple. Those performances weren't just interpretations, they were the characters themselves. The musical ran for roughly a year and received a range of reactions, some enthusiastic, others restrained. Yet even that uneven response underscored a deeper truth. The story still mattered. Audiences still wanted to return to that world, even when comparisons to the film were unavoidable and the echoes of the original performances impossible to silence. Decades later, the film carries one final, curious distinction. In many regions, Young Frankenstein remains surprisingly difficult to find on streaming platforms. Viewers often turn instead to DVDs, Blu-rays, or rare theatrical screenings to experience it. That limited access has only strengthened its mystique, giving the film an almost physical presence, something to be sought out rather than casually clicked. And perhaps that is fitting. This was a movie that flirted with chaos at every stage. A movie that nearly tipped into excess. A movie that could have reduced its monster to a throwaway impression and lost its emotional center. Instead, it held the line. It chose intelligence over noise, humanity over parody, and restraint over easy laughs. In doing so, Young Frankenstein became something rare, a comedy that endured, a tribute that honored its past, and a film that earned its place not just as a classic, but as a lasting piece of cultural history.